competition is the #1 thing that lives in every single person that I know. Like, there's not a person on this earth that can actually deny they don't want to be the best or they want to necessarily succeed where others have failed. Whether this is expressed through a team game, a puzzle game, or a first-person shooter, there is only one genre in the gaming industry that I know that actually promotes that better than anything else. Obviously, that is the quintessential fighting game, which in the recent years, I'm actually happy that the FGC has actually decided to look at those and actually treat them seriously, which is nice, you know, to actually see Street Fighter, Tekken, Soul Calibur up on the big stage for once. It's often said that fighting games have this kind of allure that actually pulls people within them, which is very different from a team game where basically, like, you can rely on your teammates, you can switch out your loadouts and everything else, whereas that in a fighting game, everything that you have, depending on the characters you pick, like all your failures, everything that comes your way, all that falls on you, the player. Which things like that are slowly starting to change thanks to games like Mortal Kombat. Like everything else, fighting games never actually started out with its best foot forward. Looking at games like Karate Champ and also Fighting Street, yeah, fighting games actually had to take a big leap forward to actually become what they are today. Looking at games like Street Fighter, which still keeps its rock, paper, scissors style to this day. Or going and looking at the King of Fighters series, which at first started out as Fatal Fury, a game that was about controlling the battlefield, to Art of Fighting, which was about charging up your meter to do super attacks, which accumulated itself within the King of Fighters series. I mean, looking at games like Soul Calibur or even Tekken, which are games that are about freely moving your character and as every single button controls a limb, all the way to games like DOA, where DOA's entire deal is all about controlling the battlefield using parries, using your opponent's crazed offense to their disadvantage and using that to get the upper hand over them. Which again is something that I really like about it, but at the same time though, if you're only looking for a game for martial arts, you can look no further than a game called Virtua Fighter, which DOA does actually take a lot of elements from, in the sense of that most of its fighters are really built around knowing a martial art, which is something that I do have to commend DOA for, of them actually paying homage to a game that actually is just about fighting. Now, fighting is basically the common element that does connect all of these games, which is the whole thing of calling it a fighting game, obviously, but still, the more that I think about it, the more that I'm like, most of these games you can't really rate on their own. Most of these games, like, they all present something that you can't necessarily overlook when it comes to something that's talking about combat, because if you actually look at all these fighting games, right, they all present something that most don't really look into whenever they're considering whichever game or title like that they're trying to pick off the shelf. Looking at a game like Street Fighter, obviously, that game has the fundamentals of saying space, zoning, and actually getting in and getting out of your opponent's like attack range. Because again, if you're using a character like Zangief going up against somebody like Dhalsim, you will have a hard time at long range versus Dhalsim having a hard time up in close range, which is not a problem that is present in a game like Tekken if I'm using King and I'm going up against somebody who's actually using somebody like Ling Xiaoyu. Now, this does sort of present itself in a game like Soul Calibur, however, which that weapon link does play a big part in how you necessarily want to take on your opponent. Because if you look at a character like Siegfried, right, and you put him up in a close quarters combat scenario with Taki, 9 times out of 10, Taki will win that fight versus him going up against somebody like Mitsurugi in a close quarters combat scenario. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and go off the cuff here because there are a few things that I still want to say, but I'm gonna try and simplify this as best I can. Technically, I'm one of those guys out there that do love beat 'em up games, not necessarily because of the fact that it's a co-op that's thing and I can move around and beat everybody up, but it's the fact that a lot of the elements present in fighting games today actually started out in the beat 'em up genre. Or at the very least, they started out in a game called Final Fight, which that, you know, if you look at the jump attacks, the stun attacks, the health bars, the time, how the enemies react, like that kind of thing, like knowing spacing and so on and so forth, like even though that game is super difficult and it's all about cheesing your opponent, at the end of the day, like the mechanics present there have been proven to kind of actually keep fighting games alive for the coming years, which is something that I am actually happy about. Now, I'm going to end this video on a positive note because, again, I really wanted to kind of go on to talk about some people who actually like to tier their fighting games, you know, but I like to say that doing that carries its own biases, because at the very least, it's like if you don't like a specific fighting game because of the fact that it has 3D elements in it, well, then I respect your opinion to not want to play those games at the very least. Because, hey, like, if you don't like it, like, who am I to call you wrong? But there are a lot of fighting games that are present within the series that don't get a lot of recognition, namely games like the Melty Blood series, Armored Core, plenty of the other like games that do carry somewhat of a beat 'em up-esque type of feel. Those games, they do a lot more to keep the, I want to say, fighting game spirit alive. And I kind of want people to go ahead and check those out, especially games that come out of the open BOR camp, because they are really wonderful. But that's kind of where I'm going to leave this at today. I'll catch you guys later. See ya.